In a world where everyone uses a mineral called quartz to create magic, Rygart and his brother are the only ones who can't. They are what society looks down on as an un-sorcerer, someone who can't use magic. Bullied, beaten up, and too poor to afford it, Rygart eventually dropped out of the magic military school he was attending, despite outclassing the other kids. He is now a 25-year-old farmer, having inherited the farmland from his father, who sold all the magic equipment they had to teach them how to survive without powers. However, his father died a year ago, and now Rygart is living a modest life with his younger brother Rygart. But things suddenly change for Rygart when one day, he gets summoned to the capital by the current king of Krishna, Hodder. There, Rygart reunites with Queen Sigyn, his school friend and crush. Despite being married to the king, she's secretly in love with our boy, and friend-zones her husband hard. She is loyal boys. Rygart heads to the palace, where he reunites with Hodder, his best friend, and one-fourth of their old friend group, the Troublesome Quartet. Their joyful reunion turns somber when Rygart asks about Zess, the last member of their group. A month ago, someone staged a coup in Assam, a nation that lies north of the Krishna Kingdom. The Athens Commonwealth and the Empire of Orlando staged military interventions, which resulted in Athens winning and taking over Assam. And Assam's capture means that Krishnan is now the next target for expansion. Hodder explains that the matter is currently hidden from the public, but Krishnan and Athenian forces are already fighting at the border. A small enemy platoon is currently inside their land, led by none other than their old friend Zess and his mecha golem thingy. Rygart thinks it's absurd that Zess is at the front lines as he was always known to be against war. After getting all the information, Rygart decides to escape to the mountains with his brother before the kingdom becomes a battlefield. But Hodder stops him, asking for his help, despite his friend being a magicless un-sorcerer who can't use any of their weapons. Athens proposed a peace treaty to end the conflict, under the condition that Krishna would surrender all its territories and have the royal family executed. After hearing that the royal family will be killed, Rygart changes his mind. The treaty means he will lose his best friend and the girl he's in love with, and he can't accept that. Hodder leads him into a mine where they recently discovered an ancient technology from a forgotten civilization. A 1,000-year-old crystallized golem was found, and Hodder wants his help to investigate the mech. But they're immediately put to the test as the enemy launches a surprise attack on them. Rygart enters the crystallized golem to figure out the controls. After accidentally touching it, the machine immediately registers him as a pilot. But it's programmed in a foreign language, so he can't understand what's on the screen. Rygart decides to go with his instincts and bursts high into the sky. The crystal surrounding the golem shatters, revealing a black golem that nobody has seen before. Rygart lands exactly at the enemy's pressure gun, but he's still trying to make sense of the controls. Just when the enemy fires at him, Rygart steps on the gas, and his golem launches itself toward the enemy, pinning it to the canyon walls. He doesn't mean to attack and hopes he didn't hurt the enemy pilot. They are immediately met with the Athenian counterattack. The enemy captain knocks Rygart out. Rygart recovers and hears Zess and Hodder talking, and decides to apprehend Zess, but gets knocked down again. Fortunately, Balder, a general of the Krishna military, arrives with reinforcements, forcing Zess and his squad to retreat. Sigyn immediately rushes to Rygart to check if he's injured, but he reassures her that he's fine, and that the newly discovered golem works for him, despite him not being able to use magic. The next day, Rygart mobilizes to assist in the battle at the kingdom's northern gate. Sigyn thinks Zess is back at it, so he has no choice but to face him again. Zess immediately asks him how he's piloting the golem, and lectures him about how the war started and pins the neighboring empire of Orlando for starting it. He tells him that Krishna colluded with Orlando, and that makes them an enemy of Athens. Rygart retorts that Hodder doesn't have any ambition and isn't a threat. Zess agrees, knowing that Hodder doesn't really want the throne. He asks Rygart to talk Hodder into surrendering, but our hero points out the awful surrender conditions, which he can't agree with. But before they can talk further, Zess boards his golem and threatens to shoot Rygart on 5 counts. He tells Rygart that unless they surrender now, a ruthless general called Borkus will join the invasion, leading over 200 golems into the capital. But Rygart stands his ground. However, Zess fires at Rygart's golem, causing him to fall. He's forced to enter his golem and flee. When he covers enough ground, he hides from the enemies, but an enemy golem spots and attacks him. Rygart manages to avoid the projectiles, but the golem attacks him again, so he brings out his claymore to defend himself. The two pilots enter close combat as Rygart's mecha is unable to use guns, but he's barely managing to control the black golem. His imprecise and brash combat techniques allow him to overpower the enemy. He flees again but stops midway when the enemy stumbles. An ally pilot appears to save Rygart under Baldur's orders and fires at the downed enemy. Rygart stops him, saying there's no need to kill the enemy, but the pilot tells him they're in the middle of an operation. They can't have prisoners. The enemy seizes the chance and shoots the newcomer in the chest, killing the guy in one shot. Rygart snaps at seeing the murder. He charges at the enemy in a sudden burst of adrenaline and lobs his lance for a bullseye. He shouts at the enemy to surrender, but she decides it's not worth it anymore, and he witnesses the second death in the span of minutes. That night, Sigyn talks to him about what happened and tries to console him, but he leaves before she can finish. The next day, he visits the grave of the pilot that died because of his inaction. There, he meets the soldier's pregnant wife. Seeing this, Rygart feels even more guilty and remorseful over the soldier's utterly preventable death. Baldur appears before him, and Rygart starts making excuses about how the pilot is an idiot for dying. But Hodder knows that his friend isn't an emotionless prick and knows how much he values people and life. The general invites him to their next mission as Hodder wants to surrender, basically sending himself and Sigyn off to die. But the recent events were too much for Rygart, and he leaves. Hodder meets him and bids him goodbye until they meet once more. But they both know that they won't see each other again. As Rygart walks off, he remembers his father telling him that it's okay to run away when he thinks he's going to die. But he realizes that he doesn't want to do that, not this time. So he turns back and finally decides to help his best friend by joining the war. The next day, Rygart is officially enlisted in the army as one of Hodder's personal knights. After outfitting the black golem Delphine, Sigyn briefs him on its limitations and says she doesn't think he has it in him to kill someone, though. However, Rygart responds that he has already killed 2 people. After Baldur informs him of enemy movement, Rygart moves out to intercept them. He spots them and charges towards Zess's squad, killing one of them. As Rygart maneuvers, Zess attacks him with pinpoint accuracy. He aims for Zess's rifle, hoping to disable him, but Zess uses this to dodge his attack, causing Rygart to fall within the enemy's firing range. But due to Delphine's insane superior movements, Rygart manages to launch himself at Zess. He tries to call for Zess, but there is no response. A group of Krysnan golems appears at a distance, moving to capture Zess, but one of his teammates disables Rygart and wreaks havoc on the approaching Krysnan soldiers. Rygart wakes up a few minutes later, looking for Zess, but Baldur informs him that he's escaped. He gets a good look at the female pilot that disabled his Delphine, and recalls the other female pilot that went to the afterlife while calling them barbarians. Hodder informs him that the soldier they captured is only 12 years old, and the soldier that had died was around 15. Athens seems to use child soldiers in their war effort, but uses experiments to accelerate their growth to the point that their bodies mature to that of adults in their 20 seconds. Due to the rising threat of a capital invasion, Sigyn tasks Rygart to join the Millennium Squadron led by Captain Narvi. This special platoon is designed to protect Hodder at all costs. While training for their mission, Rygart meets another member of the squad, Gurge. They engage in what is supposed to be a friendly battle, but the guy goes overboard and the squadron is forced to corner him to stop the fight. Sigyn meets Rygart and asks if he's okay with Gurge on his team, but Rygart tells her not to worry because he'll be fine. That night, he learns from Baldur that Gurge is the general's son, and was previously imprisoned for killing one of his comrades and disabling 9 others in a practice skirmish. Baldur confides that he doesn't understand how his son's mind works, but if Gurge ever goes out of line and attacks the team, Rygart should kill him. He meets with Hodder and asks him to promise not to surrender until his return. On the morning of the day, Rygart is leaving for his mission. Sigyn appears at his doorstep. She tells him that she's angry, but doesn't say why. In truth, she'd remembered a day similar to this one, on the last day before Rygart had left school. She tried to tell him that she had feelings for him, but he clearly ignored her. He jokes that leaving on a sour note will cause her to have sleepless nights if he dies in battle, so she tells him that she will stop being angry only if he comes back safe. Rygart promises to do so and leaves for his mission. He immediately springs into action as soon as he arrives on the battlefield. General Baldur's situation is dire as more than 20 of his units were wiped out by the enemy commander, Borkius. But Rygart's destructive arrival allows them to make up for their losses. He completely decimates several soldiers from the Athenian army with his overwhelming speed and the huge lance projecting from his chest. At this point, Rygart no longer makes an exception towards the enemy, going straight for their cockpits and mercilessly killing them in one go. But the enemy's counterfire gets intensive and Rygart's defenses are at their limit. He makes an incredible jump and unleashes a flurry of darts, but it's useless against the golem's armor. The enemies get ready to shoot at his landing spot. But at that moment, an ally sniper starts covering for him, enabling both sides to retreat. The next day, Rygart overhears that General Borkus's squad is now attacking his hometown. Upon hearing this, Rygart immediately rushes back home, hoping that his brother is still alive. But when he arrives, he finds the corpses of his fellow townsmen, all wiped out. At the same time, he also walked right into an ambush by the Athenian soldiers. Borkus appears and starts charging toward him. Unfortunately, Borkus's superior golem puts Rygart at a disadvantage. Although he tries to put up a fight, there is a clear difference in combat experience between the two pilots. Borkus baits and triggers him to attack, resulting in Rygart losing his cool. Although he manages to knock the general down with his darts, Borkus stands back unharmed. The general soon realizes that Rygart's golem is a precious relic of the past and plans to capture him. Rygart tries to defend with his katana, but Borkus destroys it and goes for a drop-kick maneuver, knocking Rygart out. Several minutes later, Rygart wakes up from the sound of soldiers dismantling his golem. He immediately goes into action to make an escape. He notices a signal coming from the mountains and leaps into the source, reuniting with his squad. But the Athenians quickly catch up to them and surround them with gunfire. The squad members are cornered and taken down one by one. Gurge breaks off from the team to escape on his own. But Rygart follows him in anger, shouting at him to get back so they can help the others. He tries to convince Gurge to stick with the squad, but he's criticized for hypocrisy because he was the one who abandoned his post to search for his brother. Gurge's criticisms turn into insults, and the two start fighting each other. He calls Rygart a traitor for endangering his comrades' lives for his own selfish reasons. He tells him he's bringing nothing but trouble to Krishna, mentioning the rumors about him dating Sijan, the queen. He tells Rygart he'll kidnap the queen and bring her to him if he manages to beat him. He just wants to literally wingman our boy. However, Rygart says he's honor-bound to protect the royal family, and anyone who dares attack them is his enemy. But their match is interrupted when several enemy officers arrive. Gurge saves Rygart and kicks him away while he takes on the elite Spartan unit of Athens by himself. Delphine goes offline, and Rygart can only watch as Gurge disposes of the enemies one by one, outmaneuvering and outgunning every single one of them. But the Spartan leader manages to tackle Gurge, posing to kill him. Rygart throws his blade, giving Gurge enough time to kill the leader, but an overwhelming number of Athenian golems arrive and start firing at Gurge. Rygart sees Gurge's last moments before his teammate sacrifices himself to save him by making him fall off a cliff to safety. Rygart later wakes up to Baldur's forces retrieving him and Delphine. They march back to the capital to regroup with the main forces defending the royal capital. As he boards Delphine, he remembers his promise to Sijan that he'll return alive. Rygart charges forward to the besieged capital and meets Borkus once again. He puts up a fierce fight against the better-equipped general, going toe-to-toe with the commander despite the general's higher ground against him. However, things change drastically when Sijan opens the hangar's gate and gives him a giant shuriken tied to a large rope as his weapon. At first, Rygart has trouble with the new weapon, but as the fight drags on, he's able to use it more effectively, enough to finally cause massive damage to the general's golem. The general steps out of his ruined golem and resorts to firing at Rygart with a handgun. At the last moment, Rygart remembers all the people important to him who had supported him up to this point. He swings his weapon and finishes off the general with one final strike. The general's defeat signals the end of the invasion, thus ending the first Athenian campaign against Krishna. Rygart, thought to be dead, shows up haggard and angry, yelling at Rygart for abandoning him. But the sight of his brother still alive only makes Rygart cry in